Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm doing my final setup for this year. It really went by super fast, but I'm really excited to start a new bullet journal soon. And as always, I'm using my journal by Arch and Olive, and you can use my code ARTENBUJOS to get 10% off, which also helps to support me and my channel. As always, I'm going to start with a quick flip through of my November setup, and this time I actually decided to include the first few days of December in the last weekly spread of November, just because I started filming a bit later, but I really loved making them this time because they were super simple and it was just a really quick theme. Now for the theme for this month, I did want something a bit festive but not too in-your-face Christmassy, because that's not really my style, so I decided on a pretty festive color palette with some greens and red, and also a gold gel pen, which I actually haven't used in a while. First, I'm starting with a small overview of December as always, and if you've seen my last couple of videos, you probably already know this one, and I have been thinking about changing things up, but honestly it just works really well, so why not just keep it for now. The calendar is mostly just to fill the page more than anything, and it gives me a bit of an overview of the dates. And then for the spacing, the days are 2 spaces wide, and then I left 1 space empty underneath the weekdays, which I wrote on the top with the red acrylograph, and then underneath I'm writing the dates with the dark green with 1 space in between the weeks. Next, I brought back my little color palette dots because I did really like them, and I'm just adding those into the empty days on the top, and then I'm also using the lighter green to add some lines in between the weeks, just to add a bit more color and a bit of separation. For my little YouTube and Instagram sections, I used the dark green for the border, but in hindsight it would have been better to use the fine liner tip just because the brush tip is a bit uneven and it can smudge more easily, so later on I switched to that method, but I just made 2 sections and then wrote the titles in red again. Then for my cover page, I wanted to make another wreath design, which I thought was very fitting for December, and I used both of the green shades to draw very simple pine branches and then some more like generic leaves following the shape of a circle, but not all the way around. So I started on the bottom part on the left side going upwards, and then I did the same thing later on from the bottom right. I also left a bit of space in between them empty. For the pine branches, I used the dark green first with the fine liner tip to make the stem, and then the brush tip to feather out the pine needles, and then for the other leaf design I used the thinner tip as well for the stems, and then the brush tip for some really simple leaves. Next, I went in with the red acrylograph to draw some berries here and there, just to fill the space a bit more evenly, and I made sure not to put them too close together and not to put too many, but I also varied the sizes to make them look a bit more natural. Then I repeated the same steps for the other side of the circle so that it's not too unbalanced, and I tried to kind of copy the overall shape so it's sort of a mirrored image, but it really doesn't have to be perfect, and it's also really easy to fill any awkward gaps with the berries. Here I just used the dark green to complete the circle on the top and bottom. Next, I'm adding a bunch of little stars and sparkles with the gold gel pen, which I think really completed the spread and made it look a lot more festive. I also love how the gold adds just a bit more warmth because both of the green shades are pretty cool toned. Lastly, I added the title with the red in the middle of the wreath, and so let's move on to my habit trackers. For the title, I used the gold gel pen to make a small star on the left side first, and then I wrote habits in red and added another star at the end. I also made a border with the dark green, this time using the fine liner side. However, it did seem a little bit too thin to me, so later on I ended up making all of the borders a little bit thicker. On the right side next to the title, I also added the color palette circles again because I didn't want too much decoration overall, since the habit trackers already look very full and I wanted to have a bit more white space to balance out the page a bit more. Now for my daily habit trackers, I first used the light green for the weekdays on the top, and I left some space in the middle and placed 3 on the left side and then another 3 on the right, since I always go for 6 in total. Then I made the borders for the actual trackers with the dark green, and again I made them a bit thicker later on, and this time I actually didn't include the weekdays inside the border like I usually do, but instead just the weeks, so the sections are 7 spaces wide and 5 spaces tall. Next, I'm writing the habits underneath the trackers in red, and I also left 2 spaces empty in between the trackers vertically. So my daily habits for this month are the same as last time, so doing my morning routine, not using social media in the morning, planning my day in my bullet journal, getting up before 9 a.m, working out, and doing my nighttime routine. Lastly, for the trackers, I crossed out the last few days of November with the gold gel pen, and I really loved how I got to use all of the colors from my palette for this month. I like to make sure that the sort of distribution of the colors are similar to what I do for my doodles. So for example, for this one, I mainly used the greens and some of the red, and then the gold was just an accent color. So I basically do the same for my sections. I hope that makes sense. And here's where I made the borders a bit thicker because they just felt a little bit too thin to actually see the color properly, so I just used the fine liner again and slightly offset the lines with a ruler to make them just a bit thicker without going over the same line again, because it just makes it look a bit darker otherwise. Then I filled the middle portion between the trackers with more of the pine branches and leaves again, and as per usual I made them into a sort of pattern, which is something I love doing. So I just kind of alternated between the two types of leaves, and I also switched between the sort of direction that they're facing. To break up the symmetry a little bit, I added the berries wherever they fit best, sometimes in groups of 2 or 3, and sometimes just 1 depending on how much space there was between the leaves, and again I varied the sizes a bit to make them look more natural. And of course I added more sparkles here and there with the gold gel pen, although I did try to not overdo it because that can make it look very chaotic very quickly, but I just tried to fill in any larger gaps. As always, I'm also adding some weekly habits on the bottom part, and I wrote the habits in red again. So I wrote down making my weekly spreads, having a little self-care day, practicing piano, and doing my weekly reset to get ready for the next week. To track them, I added 5 circles for each of the weeks underneath, switching between the lighter and the darker green for a bit of variation. And then once I complete a habit, I will color in the according circle or cross it out if I didn't do it that week. For the other page, again, I'm keeping things the same as for last month, just because it's working really well for me, and I just made a page with some planning sections for December, first making the title in the same style as for the habits, and then adding the color palette on the right side next to the title. Then for the sections, I first wrote the titles in red once again into the middle of the sections just by counting out the amount of letters and then spacing them out so that each letter fits into one of the grid spaces. I made the same 6 sections as last month, so 2 bigger ones for general to-dos and my workouts, and then some smaller ones for planning my next YouTube video, some ideas for my self-care days, events, and then lastly goals for December. Next, I made the borders, leaving 1 space empty underneath the titles for a bit more white space, and then I also left 2 spaces empty in between the sections, both horizontally and vertically, and I alternated between the 2 green shades because I didn't want one of them to be too dominant, since they're pretty balanced in the doodles as well. Lastly, I used the gold gel pen to add a line on both of the sides of the title, just to fill out the space a bit more and again to incorporate all of the colors. And that's it for these 2 pages. I really love how they turned out, and let's move on to my first weekly spread of December. I'm starting things off with a mini calendar in the upper left corner, and this time I chose a layout with square sections, each one being 11 by 11 spaces, with 2 spaces empty in between them horizontally and then 1 vertically. So this is my first section, and I placed the calendar into the middle, but I left a bit of space underneath to add a small title, and I just wrote week 1 and added a border with the dark green, and then I also added a border all around with the lighter green. For my daily sections, I started by writing the weekdays on the top into the middle of the sections, and I placed Monday on the left page, then Tuesday and Wednesday on the right, and then I continued with Thursday underneath Monday. I hope that makes sense, but you can see what I'm doing here. Then with the light green shade, I added the dates underneath the weekdays, and since I included the first few days in the last weekly spread of November, this week starts with the 4th of December, but of course you could also do it the other way around. Next, I'm adding the borders with the dark green, and I did cut out the part where I made them a bit thicker because I thought it was kind of boring to watch, and I didn't have much to say either. But anyway, the border starts underneath the weekdays because I wanted to add those golden lines next to them, so I started the borders where I wrote the dates instead. And here I'm adding the golden lines like I just mentioned, and I really loved how this ended up looking, so I hope you like it as well. And just as a little question for you guys, I was wondering about the sort of length of my videos, since I used to make a bit more complicated themes, which ended up making the videos longer in turn, and nowadays I have shifted towards very simple but quick themes, so let me know in the comments which one you prefer and what you would like to see for the next year. But getting back to the spread, I filled the whole section underneath the mini calendar with the leaf doodles again, just like I did for the habit trackers, and I really love this placement. I did pretty much the same layout for one of my weekly spreads in November, and I think it just felt really nice and balanced because you have the decoration and the overview on one side, and then all of the daily sections and planning on the other side. And I don't know, it just felt really appealing to me. Another topic I quickly wanted to talk about is the next two videos, which will be for my 2024 setup, as well as my January plan with me video. Now, as you may or may not know, I am currently working on my master thesis, and I do have to finish it until the end of January roughly, so I have quite a lot to do, and I'm not quite sure yet when I'll be able to work on those videos, so I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that they might be a bit delayed, but I'll try to keep you updated through my community posts, and thank you as always for your understanding. It really means a lot to me to have such a sweet and supportive community. Lastly, for this weekly spread, I just added two more sections on the bottom right, one for my to-dos and the other one for the next week, and I wrote the title again into the middle of the section in red, and then added the borders with the light green to separate them a bit from the daily sections. And that is it for this last setup for 2023, so let's go ahead and do a flip through as always. I think this theme ended up being a really nice balance between wintry and festive, so I hope you guys like it as well. Definitely let me know what you think, and also subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content and haven't already. And of course, always feel free to leave any questions or suggestions in the comments down below. Thank you for all of the support this year. I hope we can keep growing together in the next year as well. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!